frequencies that we do have for you all over the country. We're also live on our stream platform at desertradio.fm, alternatively stream.namibian.com.na, as well as our Facebook platform at The Namibian. This is, of course, The Conversation, and as has been topical this particular week with the death of President Hage Geingob clouding the nations, Namibians are in a moment of reflection, and they're eulogizing the late president's personality and politics in their tributes. Geingob has been involved in government business since the dawn of independence, with just a few years in between when he was away in Washington, but really has been somebody that's been in government for the longest time. Today, on The Conversation, we unpack the legacy of Namibia's third head of state, and to help us do that, we are joined by public policy analysts. That's Graham Hopwood, as well as Dr. Marius Kudumo, and economist Salomo, who joins us on the line this particular morning. Gentlemen, to all of you, a very good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, John, and good afternoon to your listeners.
Indeed. And Graham, I think I'll start off with you. And perhaps just to look at the politics of President Hage Geingob. He has always, throughout the years, branded himself as a politician and not a technocrat per se. He's always said that. He's always been proud of that. If you could just briefly, in terms of an introduction, also just looking at his legacy, how would you describe President Geingob's politics?
Well, I think the thing that always impressed me the most about the late president was that he didn't just go through the motions in terms of democracy. He was a genuine democrat, and he that came out in all kinds of ways. But obviously, initially, from his time as the chairperson of the Constituent Assembly, the way that he was able to bring previously warring factions in the country together, and within a very short period get them to agree, what actually still holds up as a really progressive constitution, considering where the backgrounds where these people came from. I think that was obviously a sign of his political ability in that area. But I think we continue to see that. As you said, the thing, I've been thinking about him. Really, we've known him since 1989, and he's hardly ever been out of the heart of our politics. Only that 3-year period between 2002 and 2005, when he was in Washington D.C. Otherwise, he's been at the heart of our politics, and therefore at the heart of our democratic development as a country. And I think that's why, I personally and IPPR and others in civil society will always be thankful to him for his role in that. And I think his belief in democracy and human rights was shown right to the end. Even though he was often criticized by the media, he still fundamentally believed in media freedom, for example. And to be honest, you can't say that of many leaders around the world, certainly not many leaders in Africa who actually demonstrated their support so clearly for the media and the freedom of the media. Civil society, we had a more checkered relationship, I think. I'm not sure that he always accepted civil society had a viable role, but and maybe we weren't then listened to as a result. But generally, I think he was a committed Democrat, and that came out in the way that he did his duties as a Prime Minister and then later as the President.
Indeed. And then Doc, I want to come to your side. Graham rightfully said that he was very involved in the political development of the country, but close to that is, of course, policy development also within the country. Just speak to us on how you would surmise his policy crafting, not only as a president, but also the contributions he made as a prime minister.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I can use some examples to illustrate what I'm trying to say. I think he was working on consensus type of policy making. If you look at the drafting of the Namibian constitution under his chairpersonship, during that time, some of us were in the trade unions. And the trade unions in the country, especially under the NUNW, released a very strong statement to say Why are they negotiating in secret? Why are they not releasing what they are discussing in this constitution so that we can see whether it is addressing the issues that we stood for? But I think long time after that, you can clearly see the type of the political environment at that time required some closeness in developing the constitution for them to reach consensus. 1991, just immediately after the independence, was the first national land conference on land and the land question in Namibia. An emotive matter, but obviously people were allowed to articulate and to participate, and out of that, the recommendations came out. It is unfortunate that we have not focused on those 1991 recommendations. If we focus on them, many of the issues that we are seeing regarding land should have been addressed because of the way how that conference took place. There was a lot of research work before the conference. It was not just emotional outbursts. So basically, he tried to reach consensus on topics that are emotional, topics that are sensitive, and the Constitution and this land conference are just example of this. But it's important to emphasize that every political leader have a different style. Sometimes you agree, sometimes you don't agree. But as Graham have said, I think he was able to respect other opinions, even if he did not agree with them.
Salomo, I'll just shift the ball to you now quickly. Just in terms of also his policies and I guess his politics as well, did this provide an environment safe enough, opportune enough for an economy like ours to thrive? Salomo, can you hear me?
John, sorry, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Did you
Yes,
did you hear my question?
Yes, I did.
All right, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, Namibia is a small and open economy in the context of the emerging markets that perhaps we now sort of refer ourselves to. I think we are more developing than emerging. But I think over the past 2 to 3 years, and perhaps it's coincides with the discovery of oil and gas, but I think in terms of Dr. Hage Geingob's tenure as the president, it goes much further back. So we have become, in the past 2 to 3 years, perhaps one of the countries that has demonstrated a huge, that has become a huge country of interest in terms of investment destination, clearly on the discovery of oil and gas, but also because of the rule of law and the constitutional democracy. There remain some gray areas in terms of the investment policy and the economic policy that we are following in terms of giving some level of greater certainty to investors. But over and above that, I think the overarching principle is that Namibia is open for business in a manner that the administration and our late president has sort of demonstrated. So he has really been one of the champions of democracy, as Graham has put it, but at the same time, that has sort of had a spillover effect to the confidence that investors have in the Namibian economy. If you look at when the president came in, which I think is around 2014, in terms of his first term when he started, I think that term we had the Minister Kali Schleitwein as the Minister of Finance. And what then happened was, in the second term, he appointed what we refer to as more fit for purpose, if it were, technocrats in certain highly, if it were, political positions. For instance, Honorable Ipumushini moved from the Bank of Namibia into the Ministry of Finance. Now remember that this coincides perhaps with what came out when he initially launched the Harambee Prosperity Plan 1. So there were certain outcomes perhaps that were not met at the time, and the president had moved very swiftly to try and see if he get certain technocrats, if it were, or certain people that bring a particular skill set to certain portfolios, especially within the economic cluster, that could perhaps accelerate Harambee Prosperity 2, and subsequently look at how we can craft the Namibian economic recovery. But this was pending that when His Excellency came in, the economy was growing around 5-6% at the time, and we grew quite well. But over the years, Namibia never had a growth problem, if it were. What the biggest problem has always been that this growth is not inclusive. And I think this is one of the areas that His Excellency really wanted to address. Because remember, he then comes up with a term that we now refer to as the Namibian House 1, and 2, that no one must be left out. And this is how perhaps some of the thinking around the food banks come as a consequence of this, him realizing that our growth as an economy is not inclusive. How do we then try to move towards making sure that we bring the majority into the mainstream economy? And this is some of the interventions that have come subsequently.
Indeed. And we'll get back to that, Salomo. I just want to make the best of the time that we have here. And Graham, I'll bring you in here. I asked you the question about, how his politics will be remembered, particularly because when the president came in, especially within the SWAPO party, we then started hearing stories around divisions. There was a whole Team Harambee, Team SWAPO situation happening, and how some people were left out after they lost and weren't on his slate. Just in terms of party politics, what does his legacy look like there?
Well, I think you can see from the reactions to his passing at the weekend that he's mourned by different parts of the party and virtually all leading politicians in SWAPO and in the opposition. So I think, if there were divisions within SWAPO, I don't think he personally was the cause of them. And as I say, I think one of his strongest skills throughout his political career was mediation, being able to listen to other people and alternative viewpoints, and being able to bring opposing sides together. Right through his time in office and as a Prime Minister, I think that was evident. And, he in Parliament, so, in the 90s, could have been very tense, and it was at times. I was a parliamentary reporter for the Namibian at the time. But he was often the source of humour. He had, he was very jovial, and he often used that as a means to lighten the mood and try and bring people together. And I think that was especially obvious during his time as Prime Minister when he was dealing with the DTA, very much still at that point the former proxy party of apartheid South Africa, and leading politicians who've been really adamantly opposed to SWAPO and had labelled them as communist and everything else. So we forget that now, of course, but his ability to lead government's business in Parliament as the Prime Minister between 1990 and 2002 demonstrated those abilities. And I think, that's the people who remember that legacy will know that I don't think he himself was the source of...
I'll just need you to come closer to your mic.
Source of faction fighting in the ruling party.
Just on that, before I move on, I mean, we saw the headlines today and yesterday, especially in the Namibian. The late president isn't even buried yet there are already contestations on, what the future of the party will look like in terms of the seat for the presidency, for the vice presidency. Taking all of that into consideration, do you think he left a SWAPO united enough, okay enough to move forward and have a successful election campaign?
Yes, there are still some tensions following the 2022 Congress. So I think that some of those now will have to be addressed in this extraordinary Congress that the party has to hold within 3 months. And of course, the leadership will be up for election, the presidency of the party, but that might free up other positions. There may be further elections. So the good thing about that is it's a democratic process. I think, from what I know of the 2022 Congress, he wasn't a full-on supporter, although he never stated his opinion of the Nandi and Ndaitwa campaign. But, I think by and large he accepted the result, and he was interested in the unity of SWAPO going into an election year. So, we would have backed her as the chosen candidate of the party. But, there are certainly risks to party unity with this forthcoming extraordinary Congress. The party can't really get out of it because it's actually very clear in black and white in the Constitution that they have to replace the president of the party. But as I say, I think he did accept, when things didn't necessarily go in his direction. So I think for the most part, I think the balance sheet will read that he was very good for SWAPO and very good for the party unity.
And then, Doc, to come back to you, Salomo spoke, on length about the Harambee Prosperity Plans, right, which was essentially brought on to as an enforcer for the NDPs. Just in terms of implementation of his policies throughout the years and of the existing policies, did that work? Was there a working formula? Could you see the results of those policies?
Yeah, look, the Harambee Prosperity Plan, in terms of what we were told, is an acceleration plan for NDPs, especially NDP 5 or so. Now, implementation of policies are dependent on the capabilities of the state, especially the public servants that must implement those policies. So if there are failures in terms of implementation, you cannot blame it on an individual. You must blame it on the capabilities of the state, on the people that man the state. Like I was saying, when you go and read the 1991 Land Conference recommendations, you ask the questions, why is it that these recommendations have not been implemented? If you look at education, 1991, there was a Presidential Commission on Higher Education. 1999, there was a Presidential Commission on Education, Arts and Culture. Some of the factors that we are seeing in education now as challenges should have been addressed already if we have acted upon those recommendations. So the point that I'm making is we might not have implemented some of the issues in the Harambee Prosperity Plan and the NDPs, and you can go many of these issues. And this is time for us for reflections to see whether we have a capable state or not, whether we have officials who can implement policies, and whether the policies that we are formulating are actually good enough. Because the problem that I have in the country is when people say our policies are good, the problem is implementation. I don't understand it as someone who studied public policy, because the reason for a policy is a purposeful action to address a problem or to take advantage of an opportunity. If you have identified a problem and you have developed a strategy of addressing it and you are not getting the result, then there's nothing good about that policy. So in a democracy like ours, it's a collective. And I think we need to pay attention to the capabilities of the state to implement whatever we want to implement. And one of the issues is merit and competencies of people who are managing the state. So there might be shortcomings, but you can't blame it on him individually. But of course, he as the head of state or any head of state appoint people, and these people should be capable of delivering. So if they are not delivering, then it must be a collective responsibility.
Salomo, just in light of the aspect of implementation, has he or the dynamic of that, the lack of implementation, or even if there was any implementation, how did that sort of affect, the state of the economy? You spoke about many gray areas within his reign in terms of the economy. Were there gaps that he could have tapped into, either by implementing certain policies or by working around certain policies? Just unpack that for us.
Well, I think Dr. Kudumo has hit the nail right on his head there in terms of the collective responsibility and not wanting to define the prosperity or the failure of a country on one individual or the president's reign. I think, like I indicated, that the president has obviously been very strategic in terms of what he wanted to achieve. Kudumo spoke about in terms of, let's take the investment promotion and facilitation, right? Again, this is the intervention that the president wanted to bring to the fore in terms of making sure that investors are not left mid-air. When I say mid-air, investors being in a position to know and understand that this is what they are signing up for in terms of the local content, in terms of beneficiation, in terms of whether NIF is coming or not. Right? The president had the foresight to want to make sure that the certainty is developed in the Namibian economy. Now, this particular bill has been going back and forth, right? And surely it can be on the president to enter into that space. Leaning again back onto what I think Graham foreshadowed in terms of the president really being a democrat in the sense of making sure that institutions, processes, and systems work, is to say, once at the conceptual or at the political level, a go-ahead has been given. The expectation is that the technocrats or the SOEs or the institutions that should then implement or roll out or complete some of these assignments are then the ones where at times you do have the slow delivery. Again, so if you look, for instance, at the SME bank, right? You think about the SME bank in terms of the context of what the thinking was. And again, you have to applaud the president in terms of the thinking around making sure that there's a targeted intervention to a certain sector of the economy that meets a different type of funding. Right? And this particular funding needed to be ring-fenced and targeted. Now, the implementation thereof again, and the checks and balances is really what at times need to be looked at. But one of the things that we also have to look at is in terms of how stern and very upright the president was in terms of during the time of perhaps one of our deepest contractions, which was COVID. I think that constant delivery of a central message in terms of how the country has closed or how the economy has opened up, and this doesn't take away in terms of whether it was wrong or right. But what you want is you want to have a leader that's able to speak to issues in a manner that there's no ambiguity, if it were, to the extent that when we are taking a certain pace in terms of the short term, but really to be able to make sure that the medium term and long term benefit is being informed by this particular short term decision. So, in that respect, one looks back at the tenure of the president as really someone who has tried to sort of be at the forefront of where the country should move. I mean, if you look at how Namibia is now on the global map, if you look at how the Namibian economy or the Orange Basin, as a matter of fact, is perhaps the hottest speaker in the global market currently, global financial market, precisely because of the confidence that the global economy has in Namibian democracy, rule of law, and protection of investor interests. This is all got to do with obviously how the president positioned the country. So where there's collective success, subsequently collective failure should also be sort of taken in that respect.
Indeed.
But over and above.
Indeed, I just really want to bring Graham here, Graham in here, Salomo. Both Dr. Kudumo and Salomo were speaking about, that collective responsibility, right? That it couldn't have just been him, whether it was good or bad. Was he a person that listened to opposition when they critiqued him? Maybe even those within his own party when they critiqued him. At times wasn't always the most favorite guy in the room. Just speak to us on his relationship with those that had critiqued him.
I think he listened, but he didn't always have patience if he disagreed. I think he tried to build a collective team in terms of his cabinet of people who were talented and able. And I think one of the things that he did really well was to utilize the 8 extra appointed people he had in the National Assembly to add extra skills to cabinet. So I think people like Ipumbushimi came through that, Yvonne Dowsep, Emma Theophilus and others. And I think he sought to get people around him who were able, who could deliver. But I don't know. Perhaps later on he wasn't quite as tolerant as other views as he was earlier. But also I don't think he came under that kind of questioning because it was only really the State of the Nation address every year when he would receive questions from the opposition, and it was interesting to see how he reacted on various issues. But I think later in his political career, he was possibly a little bit tired of some of the points. He'd probably heard them all before. But generally, as I say, he was an open person, and I think he did generally listen, even if he didn't agree. But also, if he didn't think there was a basis to what was being said to him, he would probably dismiss it quite quickly.
Indeed. And then, Doc, we also brought you in here to just quickly, talk to us about his presence on the international platform. He was sent to the UN already, before independence, and then, like Graham mentioned, he did go to Washington for those few years. Just briefly, if you can, to make the best out of time, just talk to us about his presence on the international stage.
Yeah, he had make an impact. Yesterday, those that watched the tribute from the General Assembly could actually see what I'm talking about. What makes you to deliver at the international stage is the clarity of the issues that you are addressing and your understanding of those issues that you are addressing, and understanding also those platforms. For example, at the UN, he has been there. He understands the culture and the operations of the organization. So he already had some representation skills and understanding what to say, how to say things. Obviously, when you look at the tribute that is coming in, he placed the country on the global stage, not only him, the others that were working with him. And what you bring to the international stage is your domestic policies and your domestic issues. Like his articulation of those issues of human dignity and freedoms and human rights, he articulated them well. But obviously, you can also see that it also depended on which country it is. And that is normally what you see with the liberation movements. They will criticize a certain country, they will not criticize another country because of the dynamics that are at play. But you must remember that our foreign policy is now focusing on economic diplomacy. And I think he tried, as Salomo have said, to focus on the economic diplomacy during his presidency. And when you listen to his last comments before he passed on, he has this wish to see some of those results out of the economic diplomacy bringing fruits. So I think he was a statesperson, globally respected, because he was knowledgeable about those institutions, the cultures, the issues, and also he was clear what are the issues that he was bringing to. If it was needed to be harsh, he was harsh. I remember on Monday, Dr. Ibo Mandasa referred to how he responded to the German embassy. Because it's normal in the international relations. Sometimes you have to assert your opposition.
Salomo, we will start concluding now, and I'll start with you. Look, a high Gini coefficiency gap, yet so many investments that have been made when it comes to the space of green hydrogen. So there's really a lot to tell on either sides of the coin when it comes to his performance in the economy. But moving forward, what will President Geingob's economic legacy look like? I'll give you about a minute for that.
Well, thank you so much. And like I indicated earlier, John, that we should not also sort of bring the legacy of a person like the president to one particular item, if it were. But I think one of the things that the president really tried was to build what we now know as the Namibian house, right? Namibian house, to the extent that we know we have a problem of inequality. Inequality to the extent that even if the economic metrics or indicators look good, it excludes the majority. Now, leave no one behind, which has now also become one of the SDGs, and is one of the policies or perhaps a legacy of the president, where he tried to make sure that everyone participates. Remember that he also into the State House from perhaps one of the minority tribes, if it were. So the one remember that the late Kazim Nampa, so rest in peace. Remember he said that it's time for Anano Shwamba, president at the time. So perhaps if you follow the trail and you find very quickly that he really wanted to bring about that inclusivity, trying to make sure that opportunities are sort of opened up to everyone, where everyone participates and subsequently project Namibia on a growth trajectory for the long term.
Graham, just on your side, there's always been the fish rod issue clouding him and his party. There's been the issue of, the votes that were essentially missed in the 2019 election. Yet there are also other positive issues, especially on a political point of view. Which side will the politics remember him most for, taking all of those into consideration?
Yeah, I think any politician will have a mixed record when they leave office, and I at the moment want to focus on the positives in terms of the President Geingob. I think the key role that he played in setting up our democratic governance architecture will be one of the main things that he's remembered for, if not the main thing. And I think the way that power was transferred and the way things were handled on Sunday was a demonstration of, in a way, what he had achieved, because it was a peaceful, stable transfer of power done according to the Constitution, respecting the rule of law. And that was all the things that he was trying to develop over his 30 or so years in government in Namibia. So there will be a time to consider some of the other issues around whether enough was done to tackle corruption. We still are a country with a huge inequality gap and a lot of unemployment. So clearly, there were some things that were not achieved in his time, and we have mentioned that he himself cannot be held personally responsible for all these things, and also that he was up against some very difficult factors like COVID-19. But I think on the whole, the balance sheet will show that the great and good things he did for Namibia will far outweigh any of the negatives.
And then, Doc, finally with you, just in terms of, he was always credited to be a very smart man, a man with a great brain. But I think just when we sum it up in terms of his legacy on policies that actually spoke to the realities on the ground, he was always judged for not knowing what is really going on the ground. But just your 2 cents as we wind down.
Yeah, look, there are perceptions and there are facts, especially when you are dealing with politicians. I don't think he was not in a position to know what is going on on the ground. My impression is that many of the policymakers are somehow stuck in terms of understanding what need to be done to solve some of the problems that we have. Sometimes they have these ideas in their policies and legislation, but the people that implement it, it's problematic. But I think I will remember him for having the foresight, for thinking ahead of the others. And it's only now that we are realizing what is it that he was talking about, now that we are remembering him. For example, when he was saying we have a new wave of leadership in Africa, many of us were not understanding what he's talking about. But basically, he's saying we have experimented with one-party states, we have experimented with military rule. Now we are in the democratic space where leaders come and go, and the institutions and the systems and the processes stand. Like Graham have said, we are now realizing this. I think what is important for this country is to use this opportunity to reflect and see what is the vision that we had for the country. Are we still on the right path? What is it that we need to do collectively to address it? There are many challenges facing this country. There are challenges in the education system. There are challenges in the conditions under which people are living. What are the ideas that we have? Those that are in leadership must allow us space to make our contribution and appreciate those contributions. Like Graham have said, there seems to be this notion of not appreciating what civil society organizations are saying. And the definition of a civil society is those that are present where the government is absent. Obviously, we need to open up and listen to the different views that are there. That's how we will build up the country. We must be sensitive to cultural and other diversities and respect them as our strength as a country. So let's use this to reflect. And I think the country is not on the right path. Can we bring it back to the vision that we had in 1990 when we got our independence?
Well, there's the good, there's the bad, and there's the ugly, but the consensus that we are getting here is that there was always best intentions for this country that President Hage Geingob loved oh so much. And as we sit here today, there is a nation in mourning, in reflection, and in appreciation of the institutions that are making us the democracy that we are. This was the conversation. I do thank my guests so much for joining us this particular afternoon and just allowing us to really touch on the legacy that President Hage Geingob has left behind. Of course, that will be spoken about for years to come, as the man really made his mark wherever he went, whatever he did, and whatever he said. The time on the clock is now 1:59. Thank you so much for joining in. This was The Conversation.